What if your destiny was decided not by the stars, but by a signature in a royal marriage book? What if your crown wasn't a symbol of power, but a slow, suffocating curse passed down like a disease? For centuries, royal families didn't just inherit thrones, they inherited blood. Pure, calculated, and obsessively guarded blood. Cousins married cousins, uncles wed nieces, and generation after generation, the royal genome twisted tighter, like a vine choking its own root. Not out of love, not even out of necessity, but to preserve names, dynasties, and divine rights at any cost. That cost, more often than not, was paid by the women. They were born into golden cradles and raised behind silk curtains, but their lives were not their own. Their bodies became breeding grounds for decaying bloodlines. Their minds broke under the pressure of invisible chains. Their fates were sealed before their first breath, and history has buried many of them beneath titles, palaces, and political treaties. Today, we uncover their stories, and you may think you've heard the worst, but by the time we reach the first woman on this list, the most cursed of them all, you'll question whether royalty was ever a privilege or a slow, generational tragedy disguised in jewels. Let's begin with number 10, and trust me, this final name will haunt you long after the video ends. So now, let me take you deep into the forgotten corridors of Europe's most cursed lineages, where titles were inherited, but so were the cracks in the soul. These are the 10 royal women whose blood carried more than nobility, it carried ruin, and we begin with one whose mind did not survive the weight of her crown. She was called Joanna of Castile, but history remembers her by another name, Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Born to Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, her bloodline was crafted for empire, but within that tightly sealed, the royal blood flowed centuries of inbreeding, layers of unresolved madness folded into regal duty. From her earliest years, Joanna's brilliance was shadowed by emotional storms no one dared name. She was married off to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy, a political match, a strategic union. But for Joanna, it was something far more dangerous: love. Deep, obsessive, unyielding love. So when Philip died suddenly, something inside her fractured beyond repair. She refused to bury his body. She clutched his corpse for weeks, carrying it from monastery to monastery, sleeping beside it in a coffin she demanded be opened again and again. Not even the priests could calm her, only the illusion that he might wake, might breathe again, but he never did. The court locked her away. Her children were taken, her throne dissolved, and for the next 5 decades, Joanna lived in isolation, whispering to a dead man and pacing through shadows that no longer answered her voice. She was royalty, she was madness, and she was just the beginning. Now we turn to the 9th royal woman in this descent through blood and sorrow, a figure draped in velvet and pearls, yet unraveling in silence across distant empires. Empress Carlotta of Mexico was born Charlotte of Belgium, daughter of King Leopold I and Queen Louise Marie of Orleans. Her lineage was nothing short of immaculate, interwoven with Europe's oldest blood, stretching from the French Bourbons to the Austrian Habsburgs. But behind the aristocratic pedigree lay a different inheritance: fragility. When Carlotta married Archduke Maximilian of Austria, it was seen as a union of 2 noble souls. But in truth, it was a chess move, one that would cast her into the heart of a crumbling empire half a world away. In Mexico, they were crowned emperor and empress, but the throne was cursed from the beginning, built on European arrogance and local rebellion. Carlotta foe, and herself isolated, out of place, and increasingly paranoid. Whispers of betrayal circled them, enemies closed in. And when Maximilian was captured and executed by firing squad, Carlotta's mind shattered. She fled back to Europe, but not to safety. She wandered court halls barefoot, raving about conspiracies, accusing diplomats of poisoning her, and speaking to spirits no one else could see. Her hair turned white before her time. Her eyes, once radiant with hope, dulled into a distant stare. The Empress, who once embodied regal poise, became a ghost within the palaces of Europe. Carlotta didn't just lose a crown, she lost herself, and madness, once whispered in her bloodline, now ruled her completely. Now we speak of the 8th royal woman in this cursed lineage, a queen who inherited not just a throne, but the slow, consuming fire of a mind unraveling under the weight of blood. Maria I of Portugal was born into power, the daughter of King Joseph I and Mariana Victoria of Spain, first cousins bound by politics and blood. She was a woman of grace, intellect, and fierce devotion. When she became queen, Portugal looked upon her as a symbol of divine continuity, chosen by God, touched by destiny. But what coursed through her veins told a darker story. Her family, the Braganzas and Bourbons, had long practiced intermarriage, layering bloodlines until the difference between sibling, cousin, and heir blurred. And from within that dense web came something inevitable: mental collapse, passed like heirlooms from one royal to the next. Maria's reign began with order and faith. She prayed obsessively, ruled attentively, and honored her responsibilities. But then, loss. Her husband died. Her eldest son, the crown prince, perished suddenly, and soon after, her trusted confessor followed. Grief tore through her like a blade. Visions plagued her. Screams echoed from her chambers. She was said to hear voices, angels, demons, or perhaps only echoes of ancestors who had suffered the same fate. In 1792, Maria, I was declared insane. Her reign continued in name, but in truth, she lived in darkness, confined, broken, and unreachable. She had been born to rule. Instead, she became a symbol of how tightly woven bloodlines can snap, and how the crown she wore masked a mind collapsing from within. Now we come to the seventh royal woman whose life became a battle between passion and the invisible chains of inheritance, a princess who defied the world, but could not outrun the curse passed down through her veins. Princess Victoria Melita was born into Europe's most prestigious bloodlines. The granddaughter of Queen Victoria and daughter of the Duke of Edinburgh, she was royal in every direction, British, German, and Russian. And her fate, like so many others, was not her own. She was married off to her first cousin, Ernst of Hesse, a union built not on affection, but on bloodline maintenance. It was cold, stifling, and childless at first. Behind palace walls, the two lived like strangers. Their few children would never survive. Their emotions frayed, and eventually, so did the mask. Victoria did what few royal women dared. She walked away. Her divorce sparked scandal across Europe, but she didn't stop there. She married again, this time for love, or at least rebellion. Her second husband was Grand Duke Kirill of Russia, and once again, her cousin. The genetic web tightened further. What followed was not freedom, but collapse. Their daughter died young. The Russian Empire crumbled around them. The Romanovs fell to revolution and fire, and Victoria, though defiant to the end, found herself exiled, carrying a broken dynasty on her back and a bloodline slowly eating itself from within. She had dared to choose her path, but her path had already been written, in her name, in her birth, and in the blood that linked her to every tragedy she could never quite escape. Now we descend to the sixth royal woomer, and in this lineage of sorrow, a princess whose tragedy wasn't played out in wars or betrayals, but within the delicate and crumbling architecture of her own mind. Princess Alexandra Amalie of Bavaria was born into the Grand Wittelsbach dynasty, a house known for its beauty, its intellect, and its madness. From birth, Alexandra was treated like porcelain, but no one realized how deeply that image would consume her. As a child, Alexandra came to believe she had swallowed a grand piano made of glass. Not metaphorically, but literally. She walked carefully, sat rigidly, and refused to let anyone touch her, terrified that even a gentle hand might shatter her from the inside. She wore only white, the color of ghosts and innocence, and spent her hours locked in obsessive writing, mourning things no one could see. Doctors would later name it glass delusion, a rare psychiatric condition. But Alexandra's suffering wasn't rare in her family. The Wittelsbachs were no strangers to mental collapse. Generations of cousin marriages had created a fragile legacy, one passed down through smiles and coronets, hidden until it broke. Alexandra never ruled, she never married. She became a ghost within her own home, wandering palace corridors in silence, shielding herself from a world she believed could destroy her with a single misstep. She was royal, she was gentle, she was broken from the inside out, and in her, the myth of noble perfection cracked, revealing the haunting truth behind the glass. Now we turn to the fifth royal woman, a figure of ethereal grace, remembered not for scandal or madness, but for her quiet sanctity in the shadow of dynastic ruin. Princess Elizabeth of Hesse was born into the uppermost branches of Europe's royal tree. A granddaughter of Queen Victoria, she carried the blood of empires but also the genetic weight of a curse that wound itself through the British, German, and Russian thrones. Hemophilia, mental illness, and inherited fragility were the invisible heirs that followed her from cradle to grave. Elizabeth married into the Russian Romanov dynasty, taking the hand of Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, the uncle of Tsar Nicholas II. Their union was solemn and devout but childless. And when Sergei was assassinated, blown apart by revolutionaries in a cloud of blood and fire, Elizabeth did not retreat in fear. She turned to faith. She sold her jewels, gave away her titles, built a convent, and became a servant to the poor, nursing the sick, feeding the hungry, and praying for a nation on the brink. But sainthood could not shield her from what was coming. When the Bolsheviks seized power, Elizabeth was arrested. Alongside other Romanovs, she was thrown into a mineshaft and left to die, wounded, buried alive, singing hymns in the darkness until her voice faded. Yet even in death, the bloodline lived on. The very gene she carried helped doom the last Tsarevich, Alexei, a hemophiliac, fragile, and destined to fall with the empire. Elizabeth became a saint, but the curse remained, silent, relentless, unbroken. Now we remember the fourth royal woman in this lineage of sorrow, a princess not defined by scandal or madness, but by promise. A promise so radiant, so full of life, that its sudden extinguishing cast a shadow over an entire nation. Princess Charlotte of Wales was born to George IV and Caroline of Brunswick, first cousins whose union was loveless from the start. Their marriage was a public humiliation, a theatrical collapse witnessed by the court. But from that union came Charlotte, the sole legitimate heir to the British throne, and with her, the fragile hope of a new beginning. She was bright, independent, and adored by the people. While her father scandalized the empire, Charlotte embodied what the monarchy could become: dignity, renewal, and strength. Her marriage to Prince Leopold was celebrated with joy across Britain. Finally, it seemed, the royal line had found its future. But it was not to be. At just 21, Charlotte went into labor. What should have been a triumph became a nightmare. The labor dragged on for over 50 hours, mismanaged, brutal, and irreversible. Her stillborn son was delivered first. Hours later, Charlotte died from internal bleeding. The nation mourned like never before. Black drapery covered windows. Men and women wept in the streets. And behind it all, the truth lingered quietly. Her inbred lineage may have played a deadly role in her frailty, her complications, and her fate. Charlotte didn't live to wear the crown, but in her death, the monarchy itself was shaken, reminded that even its brightest light could not escape the curse it tried so hard to deny. Now we arrive at the third royal woman in this procession of doomed inheritance, a girl born into silk and suspicion, whose very name became a battlefield for truth and lies. Juana of Castile, known to history as La Beltraneja, was the daughter of King Henry IV of Castile and Queen Joan of Portugal, first cousins in a fragile alliance meant to secure the Iberian throne. But from the moment Juana entered the world, her legitimacy was under siege. Rumors swirled like smoke in the Castilian court. Whispers claimed her true father was not the king, but his favorite courtier, Beltran de la Cueva, a man of ambition and influence, far too close to the queen. The scandal grew so fierce that Juana's very blood became a political weapon. Was she royal, or a beautifully wrapped lie? Even if her lineage had been pure, her future was poisoned. Her family tree was tangled with cousin marriages and political duplicity, leaving her vulnerable to every storm that followed. When her father died, Juana's claim to the throne ignited a civil war. But the court turned against her. So did the nobles. So did the narrative. She was forced to sign away her crown, exiled to a convent, and slowly forgotten. A queen in name only, a princess rewritten as a footnote. Juana la Beltraneja didn't die violently. She didn't go mad. She simply vanished, swallowed by the very dynasty that created her, and then refused to claim her. She was born royal, but her blood was never allowed to prove it. And now we reach the final name on this descent into hereditary ruin, the royal woman whose entire life was shaped not by one act of inbreeding, but by a dynasty built entirely upon it. Cleopatra II, Philopator, a name nearly lost in the shadow of her more famous descendants, yet hers is the most haunting legacy of all. She wasn't simply born into a tangled bloodline, she was the product of a dynasty that had turned incest into policy. The Ptolemaic rulers of Egypt, descendants of Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy, had long discarded the notion of genetic risk. Brothers married sisters, uncles married nieces. For generations, the Ptolemies locked their bloodline within itself, believing divine power lay in purity, not realizing that what they preserved was not strength, but collapse. Cleopatra II's parents were siblings. Her grandparents were too. Her own siblings married one another. The royal family tree was no longer a tree, it was a circle, tight, suffocating, and fatal. She ruled during a time of civil war and palace betrayal. At one point, she waged war against her own brother-husband, At another, her daughter married her uncle while Cleopatra was still alive, continuing the spiral, and through it all, the dynasty decayed from the inside. Madness, deformities, infertility, and quiet consequences of an obsession with purity. Cleopatra II survived longer than most, but survival, in her case, was not victory. She was power, she was blood, and she was the final proof that a crown built on itself eventually crumbles into dust. Step back now from the palaces and portraits, the royal sea, and shattered minds. Look beyond the titles, the velvet thrones, and the heraldic crests, and listen closely, not to what history celebrates, but to what it hides. These 10 women were not victims of random misfortune. Their suffering was engineered, designed by generations of rulers who believed that power must remain pure, even if that purity rotted the soul. Each woman bore the cost differently. Some went mad, some died young, some were erased, some simply disappeared into the pages of forgotten chronicles. But the thread that bound them all was the same: blood, pure, sealed, suffocating blood. They were daughters, wives, mothers, and queens. They were married off to cousins, to brothers, to men chosen not for love, but for lineage. They carried the same twisted chromosomes passed down like relics. Their children were born fragile. Their minds cracked under pressure. Their names became footnotes in dynastic experiments no one dared to question, and yet the world called them noble. Behind every crown they wore was a bargain, one made long before their births, one signed not with ink but with silence, a bargain that said, "You will rule, but you will never truly belong to yourself." These women were born royal, but they were never free, and that is the true legacy of bloodline obsession, not eternal glory, but generation after generation of quiet, unspoken suffering. And perhaps that is the most tragic inheritance of all.